Welcome to Everyday Martial Artist, a weekly podcast where you'll join me, Brian Doucette, as I interview a different martial artist each episode and hear their story. Some guests you may have heard of, and some you probably haven't. Be sure to subscribe where all your favorite podcasts are available. Also visit our website at everydaymartialartist.com. If you're listening for a specific interview, I sure hope you'll stay and check out the other episodes. A very special thank you to Topher Williams for our custom theme music. And now, the newest episode of Everyday Martial Artist. Everyday Martial Artist is brought to you by KOOnline.com for all your martial arts needs. Sparring and safety gear, rank belts, uniforms, weapons, patches, and more. Wholesale supplies made by martial artists for martial artists. Visit us today at ko-online.com. Hello and welcome to Everyday Martial Artist. I'm your host, Brian Doucette, and as we do every week, we're joined by a brand new guest talking about their life and journey throughout the world of martial arts and other stuff they're involved in. My guest today has been training in martial arts for over 27 years, earning a third-degree black belt in karate, a third degree in Lissajous-Do, and a purple belt in BJJ. He had a fighting record of 6-0 as an amateur boxer and 4-2 as an amateur kickboxer. He was on the international martial arts team Full Circle for 2 years and ran his own school for 4 years. He's been consulting martial arts businesses for a decade and founded McDojoLife 11 years ago, and is currently the vice president of Academy Safe, which is an organization dedicated to setting higher standards in the martial arts industry. Please welcome my guest today, Mr. Rob Ingram. How are you doing today, sir?
Living the dream. I appreciate you having me on.
Hey, I like it. I appreciate the time. I know how busy life can be, so anytime someone's willing to do this, I truly appreciate it.
Yeah, man, I love talking shop, so this is a pleasure for me.
Awesome. Well, what we like to do with all my guests, I want to go back to the very beginning. I mentioned you've been doing it 27 years, but I want to know where that first interest came from, that first spark that kicked off your martial arts journey.
Getting beat up. I just kept
that'll do it.
In school. Yeah. I wrote a book last year about kind of the trials and tribulations of what made me start martial arts, but it all boils down to I was born with a cleft lip and palate, so I had to go through a lot of surgeries as a kid, and that left me with a lot of scars on my face, and I got picked on and teased in school quite a bit for it. And it kind of came to a head in 7th grade, 8th grade. And a group of kids jumped me, left me kind of bleeding on the concrete. They stabbed me with pencils. I got kicked. It was like 5 minutes because they started beating me from the time the bell rang to the time the next bell rang, which is a 5-minute gap. 2 teachers watched the entire thing, did absolutely nothing about it.
Wow.
And I remember when the second bell rang, they all scattered. And I'm just laying there on the floor. And as I'm laying there, I see a figure because my glasses had gotten busted. So I couldn't really see very well, but I saw a figure coming towards me, and that happened to be one of my only friends in middle school at the time. And he picked me up and he walked me to the nurse's office. And while he was walking me there, he handed me a card, and it was a free trial martial arts card. And he said, "You need this." And I took it and I went home and I asked my mom if it was something that she would allow me to do. And she said maybe, which is not a word my mom typically uses. It's usually yes or no. So then the next month was my birthday. I came home and she had paid in full for an entire year of martial arts classes. My uniform was waiting for me.
Wow.
And I took my very first class on my birthday. So now every year on my birthday, I celebrate another year in the industry.
And what was that first style?
American freestyle karate.
Okay.
So it was a little bit more Joe Louis, Bill Wallace type karate. It was more kickboxing. We didn't do any katas or anything like that.
Okay.
It was heavily influenced by JKD. We had guys like Rick Tucci come in, Paul Vunak would come in. We'd have Dan Inosanto come in. Then they would teach us seminars regularly. So a lot of what we were doing was a lot more like JKD than karate, but it's just what it was. The influence kind of changed the style as I went.
So you said she prepaid a year. So once you got into it, what was it about it that drew you in and made you want to keep doing it?
Martial arts is a very interesting thing. There's not too much like it. When you're on the mat, on the dojo floor, and you start training, all those little petty things that everyone seems to be so upset about and worried about in their day-to-day lives tend to not matter, and they tend to go away. Like, no one cares about your political affiliation. No one cares about your age, your height, your weight, your sex, your creed, any of your beliefs or your ideologies. None of that matters. The only thing that matters is we're on the mat together and we're all working together to make ourselves individually better through group training. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think it was something that I spotted really early, especially going from being picked on and teased in school constantly to now I had a place that was immediately accepting of me, like right off the bat. And that was a special thing, and it always is.
So how long did it take then for that confidence to kick in and the bullying to stop?
Strangely enough, after I started martial arts, my first competition was point fighting. I did a point fighting match, a tournament, a month after I started.
Wow.
And I really wanted to do this for self-defense. That was the primary reason I was doing it. I was just tired of getting beaten up. So I started really kind of living in the dojo. I was there as much as I possibly could, as much as they would allow me. I was there hours before I needed to be there for class, and I was there at least an hour after sparring, like every day.
Okay.
So I was just constantly there. I don't know what the change may have been. I don't think it's as tangible as this was the moment for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's supplemental and it happens naturally on its own. I don't think that it's noticeable. And I don't think it's something that's typically taught. Like usually when you're doing a martial arts class, no one's like, this is how you become more confident. Like you're working on punches, kicks, chokes, like philosophy of it all is kind of internal. So I think that I'm just like anybody else. I think I still have my moments of insecurity. I still have my moments of doubt. I still have my moments of, oh my God, did I do this right? But when it came to school and bullying, I mean, it was almost an immediate change, awkwardly enough, because it wasn't like I was trying to not fight people anymore. I was like, okay, now I know what I'm doing. Let's test this. But I didn't tell anyone I had trained either. So it was this weird, situation where all of a sudden I was going from getting into fights all the time to I couldn't get a fight to save my life. It was wild.
Okay.
But it was a pretty immediate response.
So it's definitely something that obviously maybe you didn't realize it at the time, but other people sensed.
Maybe, it's one of those intangibles.
Yeah.
Maybe I didn't know, but maybe it was just the way I was carrying myself. Who knows?
Yeah. I've asked that a handful of my guests that had the bullying issues because it's always a different answer. And it is. I mean, and me, even with when I used to help teach kids classes, there's times with some of the little kids, you can see that change in confidence. A lot of times, at least at our school, a lot of times it's that first time they break a board. You can see that shift of something just changed and stuff like that. So I love that. I love your answer, and I love hearing the different answers about how that happened and just especially with you, how quickly it happened. That's really cool that it took you that quick.
Yeah, I would have, I think at the time I would have loved to have gotten into an altercation when I actually knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
But it just never happened.
It was the same with me. I mean, I got in too because I was getting bullied when I was 10. And my whole reason for joining, honestly, I wanted to beat up the people who were picking on me. But, the whole thing, the lessons of martial arts and stuff, I never did that. And it was many, many years later before I got in another fight. So, yeah, that's kind of cool. That's really cool. Now, you mentioned that first tournament. How'd that first tournament go?
It was weird. I wound up going in as a positive. I was like a white belt at the time. I mean, I'd only been training for a month. But when I went in, I was pretty tall. I think even at that age, I was tall for my age, just tall and skinny. And I went against a kid who was an orange belt in some art and his style or whatever that case may be. And then he winds up joining his division, but there was nobody in his division. So I wind up having to fight this kid who was an orange belt and I was a white belt. So clearly he had been doing it longer. Mm-hmm. But I was so much taller and he was really bad. He was just so bad. He just kept running in and I just picked up my foot and he just kind of kept running into my foot. And that was it. It was, 3 kicks and the whole thing was over. And you have to wait there all day to compete.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden you get your kicks, you move on with the day. So I have that trophy, I think, still, that very first one.
That's really cool. That's good. And see, me, I never got it. I was never a fan of the competition. I loved watching other people and training other people for it, but I've done one tournament in my life, and it was January 1993. Just never. And the only reason I did that is because my instructor at the time forced me to do it. I had no interest in competing.
Yeah, I think a lot of school owners do a disservice to their student base by forcing them to compete. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you want to learn how to defend yourself in real life, I think competition should be a thing you do. There are a lot of things that will help you. Understanding what it's like to get adrenaline dump, to have all those eyes on you, that nervousness. It's not the same as sparring. There's wins and losses. There's rules. People say there are no rules on the street. That is an absolute lie. Yeah. Whoever came up with that, forgot that there are these things called laws and they operate exactly like rules in competition.
Yep.
You don't get in trouble unless you get caught, right? If you do get caught, there's already an assigned punishment for whatever you broke, whether it's a rule or a law. if you break it enough, you can get in legal trouble. Whether like, let's say I'm in a competition and I go so far above and beyond, now I could be in legal trouble.
Yep.
Same thing with breaking the law. If you break a law, you could be in legal trouble pretty much immediately, depending on the law you broke.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just an astonishing comparison that you have these people who are like self-defense gurus that talk about how competition is ridiculous and you shouldn't compete because there's no rules on the street. It's like, that just means you're not truly battle tested, or you're a terrible human being who likes to go train by picking on people in public and fist fighting them in real life. So like, there's a lose-lose there. Yeah. I think if you're going to learn true self-defense, you should compete, but not everybody wants to do that. And if that's the case, then you shouldn't be forced to do something you don't want to do.
Right. So what are some things you remember about that first instructor that stand out?
My first instructor, like the very first class I took, was a guy named Dan Benitis. He was a black belt at our studio. He taught some like basic self-defense stuff. He was super fun, like relaxed guy. Always loved that dude. But after that class, I don't think I ever took another class with him.
Oh, really?
So like,
okay.
He was just like a substitute for that class for that day.
Okay.
But it was fun. I enjoyed it. My instructor's name was Master Lee Barden, and he was very well known as the nunchuck guy. And so they did a poll on this website called Freestyle Forum. And Freestyle Forum is all about nunchucks. And they left it up to a vote who was the best ever with nunchucks. And I think they said like number 1 was Bruce Lee. I think somebody said number 2 was like Michelangelo from the Ninja Turtles. And then like, I think number 3 was my instructor. And whenever I talked to him about it, I was like, how does it feel to be third? He goes, I'm not third. He goes, I'm number 1 because Bruce Lee's dead. Like Michelangelo's not a real person. So at the end of the day, I am number 1. I was like, all right, enjoy that.
That's awesome. Nice. And how long did you stay at that school?
A long time. I mean, I was with him for quite a while. From the time I was 12, I think until around 18 or 19.
Okay.
That was around the time I was getting kicked out of my home because I was a teenager. My parents always told me, hey, when you turn 18, you're going to have to get out of the house. And so when I turned 18, that was pretty much when they were like, all right, it's time to go. So wow. It wasn't like a bad thing. They just wanted me to be independent and learn how to fend for myself. And so I kind of got thrown into the world very quickly like that. But during that time, I had asked my boss for a raise. It was like a laughable raise. I was like teaching almost all the classes at that time.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, we got you like a 10-cent raise. I was like, okay, well, that's terrible because that's not going to help me at all. So I wound up doing construction probably for like a year.
Okay.
And then his number 1 student had opened up his own martial arts studio, and he called me and asked me if I wanted to work full time for him. So then I did. I loved working in the industry. I still love working in the industry. Just my capacity is different than it used to be.
Yeah. Okay. And then what was your next style in your career?
Well, I mean, I was learning Lissajous-Do, which is the nunchucks thing.
Okay.
Which really is a weapon system, but that's convoluted to just get into that for the podcast. But I did American freestyle karate. Then during that time, I was doing Lissajous-Do, which is the weapon system. So I was doing them in tandem.
Okay.
And then I started boxing at 15. And then I started doing kickboxing shortly after I think I got to my 6th win. I went 6-0 as an amateur boxer. But then after that, I was like, well, let's try kickboxing. I already know karate. I'm already doing basically that anyway. So let's do full contact kickboxing. I went 4-0 before I took my first loss. And then my second loss was immediately after that. And I was like, at that time I was on an international kickboxing team. Like we were doing sport karate tournaments and kickboxing tournaments. But it was weird because I just realized at that point, I'm not going to be a professional fighter. I'm not on that level. When you're competing internationally, you start to realize like what the talent pool is like overseas and in different places. And I wasn't even close. So I was just like, maybe this isn't for me. So I opened up a school after that.
So which did you enjoy more, boxing or kickboxing as far as competing?
I mean, competing boxing, I don't know. There's so much less to worry about. When you're kickboxing, your brain is thinking about a lot of different things that could possibly happen. And when you're boxing, you're just worried about 2 things, their left hand and their right hand.
Yep.
That's it. So I really enjoyed boxing. And where I was boxing was different too. I started boxing in a nightclub and they did what was called patron boxing. Oh. So they would set up a boxing ring in the middle of this nightclub and let anyone sign up the night up.
Wow.
And the first guy I ever fought was 30 because it was a 21 and up bar and I was 15. But my instructor was the promoter. So he said, hey, you got to get a permission slip if you want to box. And I was like, okay, no way my mom's ever going to sign this. And she did. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. So I wind up going, it was a Friday night fights at first, which eventually turned into Super Slam Sundays. But it was a rowdy place. I mean, we did 2-on-2 fights there, 1-on-2 fights, 1-on-3 fights. We had something called Thunderdome rules, which was 1 round. Wow. And it didn't end until someone got knocked out or quit. So sometimes those fights would last 15, 20 minutes.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah, I did a 2-on-2 fight there. And of course, that's not really legal anymore.
Yeah,
They've changed a lot of rules, but at the time it was a blast. And I was like a teenage kid. Like, I thought it was so cool to be able to fight in this bar.
How were the rules? I mean, like on a 2-on-2, how did that work?
Well, you had, so it was 3 rounds.
Okay.
The first round was yourself and an opponent. Just you two, so just a regular boxing match. Then after you left, then they would put the other 2 in, so they would box each other. And then if everybody made it out of those rounds without getting knocked out or quitting, then you would have a 3rd round, and that 3rd round would be both fighters from either side in the ring, and then 2 referees. And the 2 referees would be there, and they would just kind of monitor as best they could. But you were allowed to just like haul off and hit the other guy if he wasn't looking. It was like a riot inside the ring.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, it was fun. It was a really good time. I mean, the way that it was set up, like, I think the worst thing that they ever had happen was your standard boxing injuries, at least at that club. You know, they'd have a broken nose or a broken rib or whatever, but it's boxing. Yeah. So like, that's going to happen anyway. Yeah. But nothing major. It was just a good time.
I mean, you talk about like the patron boxing. So I mean, I'm assuming a lot of the people that signed up had no boxing experience.
Oh yeah. Like,
okay.
So some of them would show up, they'd just be hammered drunk.
Yeah.
So they'd get in the ring and you could tell they were drunk. Or sometimes somebody would start, I remember one time, I wrote about this in the book too. So while there was a fighter's area, but it was like a green room because it was a nightclub that was usually hosting like live bands. So they had 2 green rooms. One was a large green room and the other was more like a makeup room. Mm-hmm. And the makeup room was usually where people would go to weigh in. But the big room, all the fighters would be in that room. So it wasn't like red fighters in one room, blue corner in the other. It was like everyone was in that room. Wow. And it was tense all the time in there because these are people who were like bros. Like, I'll fight you, you know, and like we're in Jacksonville, Florida. So it's like Southern. So there's a lot of like that good old boy redneck types that are in there. And they'd be mixed in there with thugs, or they'd be mixed in there with like guys who actually were good boxers. Like there was a stable of guys that would fight every Friday. Mm-hmm. And unlike normal boxing, you could have like 3 or 4 fights a night if you wanted to.
Yeah.
You just fight. Like we had a guy there. His name was Bobby DeLuge. He eventually became a professional. But I remember watching him fight 3 times in a night and knocking out 3 people.
Wow.
And he was like 110 pounds, I think, but he would fight guys who were like 215 and just lay them out cold. He hit so hard.
Reminds me of the old day. I used to judge MMA, and I started judging before the commission was put in place in the state I judged in. And I remember some of those, 2001, 2002, promoter would get up there and be like, yeah, one of our fighters had to drop out. Anybody want free beer for the night if you come fight? Like 5 people would raise their hands. I'm like, okay, this is not going to be good.
Yeah, it was rowdy. It was really fun, but it was a rowdy place. And so I grew up like as a teenager going to this bar like every Friday night. And if I wanted to fight, I would. And if not, I wouldn't. But I did enjoy fighting. It was a good time. And it really did help you learn. Because when you're sparring or fighting against someone who knows technically what they're doing, it's a lot easier to read. Because you're like, okay, the jab is going to come. I'm going to see the jab. I'm going to see a cross, hook, uppercut. Like I'll see these clean lines that are easy to read. When you're fighting someone who doesn't know those things, they'll throw the most wild, unorthodox stuff at you. And you have to adjust to that on the fly, under pressure, in a rowdy bar. It's a much different beast. And I think it helped me understand self-defense so much better because I was in a situation where it's like, here's a stranger. I'm 15. They're 30. We're going to fight now. And all intents and purposes, on paper, I should lose this fight. Mm-hmm. But it went to show that by training and working on technique and working on the craft, that it does work. You just have to make sure that you keep your head clear and you go in understanding that this is going to be violent. And when you get in there and you're not worried about the violence, or you get hit and then it's almost laughable because you're used to people hitting you well. When someone who doesn't know what they're doing hits you, it feels like getting hit with a pillow. Yeah. You're like, oh, well, you suck at this. Then you just beat them up. Like it's just, I learned a lot in those times.
Nice. I like it. So you mentioned that, you had worked at the other school and then opened your own about a year or so later. So what drew you to the teaching side of martial arts? What made you want to teach?
I always liked teaching. I don't think there's ever been a time I didn't enjoy teaching.
Okay.
I think you learn so much through teaching because you have to analyze the technique. You have to analyze the who, what, why, when, where of something, and then explain that in a clear, direct way to another person as best you can. So that way they can pick up on it faster than you did. Mm-hmm. I think if you're a good teacher, your goal is to try to all those mistakes that you had made or had to go through. You want to make it easier for your student. You don't want to make it harder. The old school ideologies that we see on TV, like the Miyagi's, right? Like that dude wasn't a great teacher. Like he wasn't. Like he was making this dude do all his yard work and not explaining it to him. He made it longer. It didn't have to go through that process. And I think that Daniel-san would have been better if he would have actually explained things to him. Maybe he would have worked harder at something or done it better or understood the purpose better. But, we have these fantasies of these delusions that we see on television and we think that's how it should be. Like if you can't explain something clearly and directly and your student, no matter what their background or ideology, can't pick up on it, then you're not a good teacher. Like your goal should be to explain it in a clear, direct way. So that way they can pick up on it as fast as possible because we have a finite amount of time on this planet. Right. So the longer we draw this out, you might have imagine if Daniel-san got into a fist fight like a week into training with Miyagi. Like he would have just gotten beaten up. That's it. Like he would have, I don't know how to sand the floor. Like he was just lost. But if Miyagi was like, this is a block. This is why I'm having you do this a million times. A week in, he probably would have been able to start defending himself. But that's just my opinion.
Well, and it's Hollywood, so it's fictionalized. Yeah. It's still a good movie.
Yeah, exactly. Like Pai Mei's not real. Like you're not going to be 80 years old and be able to beat up 15 people. Like that's a fantasy. You're going to be 80. Like fighters retire around 35 for a reason. Like your body just stops working the same way.
Yeah.
I mean, we would love for us to be able to grow older and just become that much better. But there is a plateau. There's a peak, a plateau, and a drop off for everything.
What made you decide to close the school or stop teaching? What kind? Because you said you had the school for 4 years. What led to that?
Oh, I got bought out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was around the time I opened up my facility. I started to kind of realize how much more freedom I had when I wasn't working for someone else. Mm-hmm. So I was like, well, I can actually start training jiu-jitsu. So I did. And while I was training jiu-jitsu, I had this timing where I would teach in the mornings all the way through the afternoon. And then after in the evenings, I go train jiu-jitsu. And eventually that became like, okay, well, I'm going to start assisting with classes there, helping out a little bit more at that facility too. And then they were like, hey, we see what you're doing. Because I was doing satellite programs. So I would go out and teach on site at businesses. And I was making good money because there's really no overhead at all. Mm-hmm. You just show up to their business. You teach on site, whether it be a preschool, high school, private school, gym, etc. And then you go home and you could get paid really well for that. I mean, at the time, I was charging $50 a person. I teach at each facility one time per week, and I'd have like 20 or 30 students in each class.
Wow.
And I do that probably 4 or 5 times a day. And that was like my whole day. Teach 4 classes and I'm done. And I was making good money doing it. And then they were like, hey, would you like to come do that for us? And I saw an opportunity where I could split my time a little more equal. I wouldn't be working as much because of all the paperwork they'd be doing instead of me. So I was like, okay. So I wind up basically selling the business to them.
So you sold it to them and then they basically hired you to do the same thing.
Exactly.
Nice.
It was nice.
Win-win.
Yeah. And, the paperwork stuff has never been the stuff I've enjoyed. And so when another company is like, hey, you can make pretty much the same amount of money, just do that under our umbrella. And I was like, okay. So it worked out.
And honestly, I don't think anyone enjoys paperwork. If they say they do, they're lying.
Or they're weird.
Yeah, I suppose that too. Maybe some people actually do, but that's just weird. I hate paperwork. So do you still do that then or no?
No, I became a striking coach at that facility. So mm-hmm. I wound up building their kickboxing program from the ground up. They had a stable of MMA fighters. So I was teaching those guys a lot, working a lot with them to get them ready for their fights. And then I was helping with their kids programs. So I set up a summer camp program inside the facility as well. So I was wearing a lot of hats there, and I was actually getting prepared for a summer camp. And we had rented out the facility right next door because we were like in a strip mall area.
Mm-hmm.
So the building right next door to us was empty. And I was like, that'd be perfect for summer camp. So we wind up renting that out, but it needed a little bit of work. So I had to paint. And while I was painting, my phone started buzzing. But I had paint all over my hands and stuff. So I had to just like shut my phone off in my pocket. I wind up going back next door to start washing up so that way I could teach the kids class. And a parent walked in and said, congratulations. And I was like, for what? And they said, oh, well, Joe Rogan talked about you for like 15 minutes on his show the other day or today. I was like, really? So I reached back in my phone and I turned my phone on and the notifications just kept scrolling and scrolling. And I was like, oh my God. And like in a matter of that day, I think I wound up getting like 50,000 more followers on Instagram. I think I wound up getting another 5,000 on YouTube. My Facebook at that time had just peaked over 100,000, which now I had gotten kicked off after that Facebook. So I had to rebuild that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, like it wound up being like this life-changing moment because he talked about me on his show. Like it was so weird.
Wow.
Like McDojoLife then really started to take off.
Talk about that. How did the consulting martial arts school start, and how did you decide to launch McDojoLife?
Well, they went hand in hand. So when I had already started McDojoLife, probably, I don't know, I think I was a blue belt when I started McDojoLife. So I've been doing that now, I think 11 years is where we're at.
Okay.
Whenever that happened, I just realized that there was a problem in the industry that no one seemed to truly be addressing in a serious way. People were making fun of each other, but martial arts is very convoluted in the way that they talk to each other. It's so strange. Everybody is against everybody else, although we're all in this together.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's the old school mindset. I do jiu-jitsu, so I could just take you down and beat you up. Or like, oh, good luck with that jiu-jitsu because I just hit you in the death touch and then you fall over. Like everybody's just angry at each other for no real reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a conversation with a student. It was like his first official day signed up for jiu-jitsu. And I had substituted that class at noon. And then we got on the subject of McDojos, which has been a term, has been around way, way longer than I've even been alive.
Yeah.
And then while we were having the conversation, everyone left to go home. And this guy stayed behind and he goes, hey, I'm a little embarrassed. I don't know what a McDojo is. And I was like, oh, well, I kind of explained it to him the best I could at the time. And he just asked me, why doesn't anyone do anything about that? And I really thought about it. I was like, that is a really good question. I don't have an answer for. So I started looking into it a little bit, and I realized the only thing that we had at the time was something called Bullshido forums.
Yep.
And Bullshido forums, for anyone who doesn't know, was basically just a trash talking website. It was just people making fun of martial arts that was bad. But no one had a true solution to a problem. And the only way to fix an issue is you have to define it first. So I saw a lot of conversations I just didn't agree with. People will say, oh, that's a McDojo because they charge too much. I'm like, well, that's subjective to the individual.
Yeah.
If the individual can't afford it, they just can't afford it. It doesn't mean that they're charging too much. If that was the case, then Lamborghini is a fraud. Like,
yeah,
you just can't afford it. It doesn't mean it's too much. It's just too much for you. So, and then I started thinking about it. People would say, oh, they got their black belt too fast. Like they'd make fun of Taekwondo guys for getting their black belt in like 4 years. Then I thought about it. I was like, didn't BJ Penn get his black belt in like 3? Then there's no answer. Like, oh, well, he's good. No, the difference is he does a martial art that you do and you respect. So you're okay with that over here, but not over there. And that's hypocrisy. So then I started thinking about, well, if that's not the case, what else could it be? People said, oh, they're not very good. Like they're not skilled enough. Well, that's also subjective. Mm-hmm. You could be the best in your school. It doesn't mean you're the best in your city. You could be the best in your city, might not be the best in your state, might be the best in your state, might not be the best in your country, etc.
Right.
So skill is also subjective. So at the end of the day, what really is the issue? And so I had to start defining it. And then while I was doing that, I started making posts about my opinions and my thoughts and what was going on. And a lot of people out there were like, well, I see this fraud has a full class and I can barely get students to show up. So I've been in the industry for so long. I was like, I could help you with that if you want. And then I started doing consulting in tandem because one would reveal the other issue, which is that so many people in the industry have no clue how to run a business. And then that opened up my eyes to realize that I think the reason that the martial arts industry is in such disarray is because there are not very many good businessmen in the industry, and people almost make fun of it. if you're financially successful, you have to be a McDojo, and that's just not true. You should be able to teach martial arts and make a living doing it because it is a very specific skill that not a lot of people are good at. And it's a lot of time, effort, energy that goes into it. So why are we making fun of people who are financially successful?
Right.
And also, to add to that, businesses that run like businesses typically do things very structured, like local federal background checks on their employees and students, or just their employees and volunteers. That solves so many issues, but because people aren't looking at it like a business, they wind up like just basically letting sex offenders teach classes because they just didn't do any research into who these people are. So the bigger issues aren't skill or belt level or how long it takes for you to go from point A to point B in your martial arts journey. What the real issues are honestly legal, and no one seems to truly care. And that's kind of where McDojoLife stepped in.
You mentioned over the years getting like threats and stuff from some of the people you've exposed. I mean, did that start pretty quickly?
Yeah, like when I first started, I didn't even put my face on the page. I think it took like 4 years in before I did that, if I remember. But that's been so long. But yeah, I started realizing the only way that I was going to grow was I needed to make original content, you know, and so I started doing that. Well, then I realized, well, I have to put my face on this. Someone's going to, you know, and then people started asking, they want to know who I was and how was I able to talk on these things if, you know, I wasn't even willing to put myself out there. And I was like, you know what, that's fair. So I have a very good, I would think, resume in the industry. So I wasn't afraid to put that out there. What I was afraid was the things that come with that, which is you're going to have to deal with people heckling you. You're going to have to deal, which is the internet.
Yeah.
You're going to have to deal with, you know, when you expose like someone's instructor, it's like exposing a cult. And sometimes they are cults. And usually the instructor doesn't say a word. 9 times out of 10, when I do a story, the instructor doesn't say anything back. Mm-hmm. But the students, man, they are like devout. And that's where the threats come, you know, and that's where you start getting creepy people. I remember I was at a dinner in Las Vegas. And while I was at dinner, someone had taken a photo of me from across the room, sent it to me, and that was it. Didn't tell me who they were, didn't say, hey, nothing. And I was like, don't you understand how weird that is? Wow. But, you know, I get people death threats all the time. Like you expose, like there was a guy in Canada who went psychotic. He's a Muay Thai instructor, and he was just going off the deep end. But he had threatened to kill me. You know, right now I'm going through a lawsuit because a guy hired a registered sex offender. And then I told a story about that. So he tried to sue me for defamation. I'm like, no, you really did do that. Like, why are you suing me? But yeah, so I've been going through that. It's not an easy job. Yeah. And I think that people who only follow maybe the Instagram and don't look at the YouTube might not get it. Mm-hmm. They might just think I'm just making fun of people. But the Instagram is there to start the conversation. If they want to actually care, if they really cared about the pedophile, they really care about the fraud, they really care, it's a button click to watch a YouTube video to get a full story, to get the idea of what's going on. And I'm grateful for being able to do what I do, but it does come with some hazard.
Yeah, I would imagine that. It's something that needs to be done. And I was looking at your website. Talk about, looks like it's maybe not done yet, but talk about the documentary.
Yeah, we actually started the documentary. I think it's been almost 4 years now.
Okay.
And documentaries are not like scripted shows, which I think a lot of people don't get that.
Yeah.
They go, how come it's not done yet? Well, how about you shut your hole? First, it took like 3 months from the time we announced we were going to do it to get to the point where we were happy with how we were going to do the crowdfunding. And when we did our crowdfunding, we had tiers set up, like people would get rewards for whatever they paid. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the higher, the better the reward. And then from that, it was another 3 months of actual crowdfunding. Well, that's 6 months. So it's not like, boom, we have money now. Like, and then in that 6 months, we were able to raise $20,000, but our goal was $200,000.
Oh, wow.
So we fell short because of 2 reasons. One, there was a guy who previously, I guess a year or 2 before that, had started a documentary crowdfund for a thing called Red Belt or Red Belts, whatever it was. And it was a documentary about all the red belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But he just took everyone's money and disappeared.
Oh,
so like people were jaded from that. And I was like, I don't even know who that is. Like, he has nothing to do with me. But they were so jaded, they would talk crap about us. They were like, oh, I bet you it's just like that. I was like, no, it's not. But anyway, then another hiccup that happened was there was a guy on YouTube, I guess, that saw how successful the campaign was going. And he made a quotations documentary, taking all of the clips that I had already put out online with my logo still in them. Jeez. And put together like a 30-minute YouTube video that is not a documentary at all. But he called it that. So people were going over there. I think right now maybe it has like 9 million views or something like that.
Wow.
But people were going over there and they'd start sharing that link like, oh, don't donate to the campaign. Just watch this for free. And I'm like, it's not a documentary. And I should sue the living hell out of this guy. But the problem is now I have an ethical, moral dilemma. He is spreading the word about these frauds.
Yeah.
A lot of people did see that. Now, granted, trademark and copyright infringement out the butt because my logo was all over that thing.
Yeah.
But he did do something that I was trying to do anyway, which is get more eyeballs on the issue. So I just took the bite.
Okay.
But we wind up raising $20,000. So we're 6 months in, and then we were like, all right, we're all going to be available in another 3 months. So my team, my crew, everybody, we were like, we're just going to do it with the 20 we have, and I'll just pull money out my own pocket, and they'll sacrifice, and we'll make it happen. So we scheduled it for 3 months after that. So here we are 9 months into the process, and COVID hit.
Oh.
And it's amazing how quickly people forgot that's even a thing.
Yeah.
But it consumed our lives for 2 years. Leaving the house was damn near impossible. Like, martial arts studios were closing left and right. Some were open, but only underground, and you couldn't film in there.
Yeah.
So it was a pain. So for 2 years, we're trying to figure out what we're going to do with this thing. So now we're almost 3 years in, 9 months, 2 years in. And then all of a sudden, it seemed like the restrictions were easing up. So we got excited. We're like, all right, cool, let's do this. And then 2 weeks before we were scheduled to shoot, the restrictions went back up. We're like, damn it. So we wind up having a heart-to-heart with each other, let's just do this, let's schedule it. The second that the restrictions are going to go down again in California, I'll go right back out there. And so I did. We wound up filming for 30 days, editing for another 2 months. And then by the time we were done, we just weren't super happy with the way the trailer was turning out.
Okay.
So we had already filmed and we thought we were done, but we could not get the trailer to convey what we wanted it to convey. We did 5 or 6 renditions of this damn thing.
Wow.
And it just never turned out right. And I was like, this sucks. Because if we can't get the trailer to pull people in, I was like, if I'm not willing to watch it based off this trailer, no one will be.
Yeah.
Because no one's going to be as excited about this as I am. So we wind up getting a guy. His name's Jonathan Sadowski. He's a producer and actor, but he is a hardcore martial arts fan, martial artist, and loves the page. So I reached out to him and he was like, oh, I actually know a director. He has an Emmy for editing. He goes, why don't you talk to him and maybe he can help you with your trailer? So we talked to him. His name's Adam Wood. And then after we got him to do the trailer, he got it right the first time. It was incredibly good. And we were like, oh, this is great. Then we started talking to him and it turns out with the footage that we had, he just said the same thing that a lot of other people were saying, which was don't settle for what you have because you can make this better. And so we're like, okay, we'll just have to make it better. So now he's our director. Thank God. He's a great dude.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got a new producer on. And then I go to ADCC 2 years ago. So while I'm at ADCC, I wind up running into Jocko Willink and we're chit-chatting. And I tell him pretty much everything I just told you. And he goes, why didn't you ask me for money? I was like, well, I just met you, man. It's not like we've met before. I could just ask to borrow money. But he liked the project. I wind up flying out to his facility the next week. We had a 2-hour conversation, loved it. And I just asked him straight up, do you want to be a part of this? He said, absolutely. So we shook hands. And then now he's an executive producer of the film. And then we have all of this together. We wind up getting representation by a company called UTA, which is one of the top talent agencies in the world. So now we have them representing the project or the IP, I guess. And then we wind up running into another company. I'm not going to say their name because I don't know. This was not a good thing that happened.
Okay.
We wound up running into a company that was going to give us a full ride. They were going to pay for the entire thing. They were going to get distribution. They were going to do everything for us. But they wanted full creative control. Mm-hmm. They wanted full business control. They were going to fire my director pretty much immediately, which was also going to get our entertainment lawyer fired. They wanted to basically gut the crew. Without creative control or business control, there would have been nothing I could do about it. I would have just collected a paycheck.
Yeah.
And then they were trying so hard to inject politics into the film.
Oh, jeez.
And I was like, well, this isn't a political film. And they gave us a list of all the things they were going to do before we signed. And I was like, I'm not signing this. But that was a long process to get to that. So we're talking another 6-7 months, if not longer, of us going back and forth because they're like, hey, we'll pay for this, but these are the stipulations. So we thought maybe we can compromise, but that company had no compromise. We were willing to work with them, but they did not want to budge on anything.
Jeez.
So after all that, we're like, all right, well, I could have easily taken that money and they would have put out something, but it would have not been what we were trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
And then I realized, like, well, they're going to try to fire all my people. I was like, well, that's not going to happen. So I actually made all of my team part owners of the IP. So now it's impossible to fire any of them.
Nice.
And so, of course, I took a huge hit doing that, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
Because I have nothing but faith in my team. And my team is going to continue to be my team until we get it across the finish line. And we're almost there.
Nice.
So that brings us to current, where we are talking with a company called 22 Summers, which is Idris Elba's production company.
Oh, cool.
We had 2 meetings with them. First one was supposed to be 45 minutes and wound up being an hour and a half. And then the next one, we had no time limit. Like, we were just kicking back and forth ideas like production or development for like 2.5 hours. They brought on a writer, their head of creative development, had fantastic conversation. And now we're at the point where we're going to be trying to send over a development agreement and see if it goes well. So we think that will be where we wind up hanging our hat. So we'll have not only, hopefully, fingers crossed, but we already have Jocko Willink as an executive producer. How cool would it be to also have Idris Elba as an executive producer as well?
Yeah. Wow. And so you're hoping 2025 release?
Yeah. I mean, it's a very weird, like, documentaries, again, aren't scripted.
Yeah.
So certain things you want to move quickly and certain things you don't. So with me being sued, that kind of extended the film. So I've been having to go through the lawsuit process and film every step of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're to the point where I think I'm going to wind up deposing the guy, which will force him almost to perjure himself. That's his choice. He can lie or not, but he's in a weird position because there's a thing called Megan's Law.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And Megan's Law says that if you are a registered sex offender, you have to tell your boss or place where you volunteer around children that you are a sex offender. So legally, he was obligated to say this.
Yeah.
Well, the boss, the guy who hired him, the guy who's suing me, his name's Brian Antak. Brian Antak's Kempo Karate, by the way, in Bakersfield, just in case anybody doesn't want to go. But Brian Antak, he says that the guy, Gary Snap Ferguson, the sex offender, never told him. Well, that's not true, but that's what he's holding on to. And there's plenty of evidence and proof that that's not true. So basically, if he continues to lie and say he didn't know, then he's going to perjure himself because that's how the deposition is going to go. And then, of course, the sex offender's probably not going to go along with that lie because he doesn't want to go to jail. So he'll probably tell the truth, which is, yes, he did. I did tell him. So it'll make for interesting movie anyway.
You have to let me know when it's out. I will definitely promote it. So that's kind of cool.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
So you mentioned your book. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. While COVID was going on, I had nothing to do. So like that entire time was supposed to be dedicated to just filming, but we couldn't do anything. So I was like in this weird limbo for that 2 years. So I just started writing a book, a guy named Lewis Martin. I knew him. He's actually in our documentary because he was in a martial arts cult. He wrote a book about it, and that book is called The True Believers. I read it probably 3 times because I was so fascinated with the process. Like he explained so well, like how he fell into the cult, the weird things that would happen. And I just loved the book so much that we wanted to interview him about that for the documentary. And come to find out later on down the road, he wrote Tom DeBlass's book. And I was like, oh man, like that's a great name to have like as a co-author. And I was like, I want to write a book. And me and him talked, and he wound up helping me with this one a lot. He did so much work, and I'm extremely picky. Like I wanted my book to be as accurate as humanly possible. Mm-hmm. So we wind up writing that, and it's about how I started martial arts. A lot of stories like from the bars when I was fighting there. I saw my instructor set himself on fire in one of those nightclubs.
Jeez.
Yeah, there was like the 2-on-2 fights, riots that would happen. Like it was a rowdy time, but it's a lot of like my relationship with martial arts, my instructors, and just kind of being a teenager in that time. So it was fun to write. And one thing that was important, like I said, was it to be as accurate as possible. So the beginning of every chapter has a photo proof of every story I tell.
That's cool. You'll have to send me a link to that because I will include that when the episode comes out for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm sure Louis would appreciate it too.
Yes, definitely. Talk about Academy Safe. You mentioned that. A little bit about how you got involved with them.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like the yin to the yang of McDojoLife. There was a guy, his name's Milton, and Milton runs a Jiu-Jitsu Dummies podcast. So we had talked for years. I had been on his show twice, I do believe. And he had an incident occur that kind of brought this like to the forefront of his mind, and he decided to start Academy Safe. So he's the president and he's the founder. he started Academy Safe, and then he hit me up one day and he was like, hey man, do you want to be a part of this? He's like, I'm trying to accredit martial arts studios as safe. And I was like, yeah, I mean, people have been asking me to do that for a long time. I was like, I just didn't have the manpower or the ability to do it on my own. But he has a team. So he offered me a position as vice president. I took it immediately. Didn't even blink. And then now we're working on giving martial arts studios accreditation, almost like an Angie's List for martial arts studios, but based off of tangible things, not, oh, they charge too much, or, oh, that's they're not very good. No, like it's what's more important is, are the studios locally and federally background checked for their employees? That way you can keep sex offenders out of the industry. Do they have defibrillators on site? Because as often as sudden cardiac arrest happens, it would be very handy to have that, and it would save lives. Do they have cameras inside the studios? That's important. Those cameras allow people to know whether or not some kind of sexual act did take place when they're accused. And they would be able to monitor their coaches and their staff if anything bad happens. Safe sport is something that overseas is required for a lot of coaches and gym owners. Over here in the United States, not required at all. So if someone takes the time to get safe sport certified, that helps them as well. And then finally, can we track their lineage? And of course, CPR first aid certification. But can we track their lineage? Are you who you say you are?
Okay.
Because there's a lot of people who aren't.
Yeah.
And they get away with it for years because they just are charismatic and people don't understand the industry. But if somebody's able to do all of those things, then they can be certified as Academy Safe. And then that, we hope, will wind up being a little bit more relevant to the consumer. And it might keep the actual government out of it. Because with as many stories as I do about martial artists who molested kids or have taken advantage of their position of power, it's only a matter of time before the government does step in. But if we can create an independent governing body that isn't downing anyone, it's just showing the good, then what that'll do is hopefully it'll take that place, and then the government might not overreach, which is what we're afraid of, which we've already seen in like New York with like the diaphragm bill, where police officers are not allowed to put pressure on assailants' diaphragm when they're apprehending them, which is the most asinine thing I've ever heard. You can shoot them, you can hit them with your car, you could pick up an assailant, drop him on his head, you could beat him up, whatever the case may be, pepper spray him, hit him with a nightstick, but don't mount him. That's ridiculous. That only makes it less safe for everyone.
Definitely. I saw the only link I could find for that was the Facebook page. So I don't know, do they not have a website yet, or?
No, the website is going to be a big part of Academy Safe, so we're developing it. The website will act, like I said, like an Angie's List, and so it will list every school that there is, regardless of martial art. And obviously that's going to take a while to make sure that we grow that list and all that, but it'll list every school. And then when you search your area, the schools that have completed more of that list I talked about will have carte blanche. So they'll be at the top of the search engine.
Okay.
So if you're looking for, like, let's say karate, there'll be a list of all the karate schools in that area. But at the top of that list will be all the Academy Safe certified schools. And then it'll trickle down based off of those criteria. So at the very bottom of the list, they'll have provided none of that. No CPR first aid certification, no background checks, nothing. But as you go up, they would have completed more of those things or have more of those. So the idea is that now the consumer can look at something other than just cost and know that the facility is safer, because we can't predict the future, but we know that at least they're taking steps to care about the safety of their students.
I like it. That's cool. No, I'll definitely put links out for all that stuff. All right. So in all your years of martial arts, is there one philosophy that's at the top of your list?
Oh, man, I have to think about that one. I mean, I'm pretty much just a feather in the wind. I don't know if I have like philosophies that are ingrained in me.
Okay.
You know, I think that over the years of doing McDojoLife, how I have viewed martial arts has drastically changed. You know, I think that people view martial arts as something that I think that it's not. They want it to be this holier than thou experience when it's just a service. It's truly just a service. Like, that's it. But people put it on such a high pedestal, they allow it to take advantage of them. I think that fighting is very similar to swimming. Like, for instance, if I were to try to swim right now, not only would that be a useless skill, but I'd look weird. Like, you can't swim on the concrete. You could, but it's not the most effective way. But it's the same thing if I get like into a fist fight. If I just randomly fist fight somebody because they're next to me, that wouldn't be the appropriate time to fight someone.
Yeah.
You know, like just to randomly haul off and hit them. But if someone takes me and puts me in the deep end of a swimming pool and I don't know how to swim, I will drown and die. If someone puts me in the middle of a fist fight in the street, there is a good possibility that I could die. So if I'm in the deep end of a pool, I better know how to swim. And if I'm in a fist fight, I better know how to fight. So I think that people look at it as this bigger than life thing when it's really not. It's just a skill. And I think if more people started looking at it as less of a spiritualistic thing and more of a physical thing that might have some other benefits, I think that it would make them not only the industry safer, but I think it would give people better expectations of what to get out of it.
Okay, good. I like that answer. All right, I have a few fun questions that we use to wrap up the show. Let's say you were going to step into the octagon. What song would be playing? What's your walk-up music going to be?
I always, whenever I walked into the ring, I always had the same song.
Yeah?
It was If You Want Blood by AC/DC.
Nice. I think you're the first one to pick AC/DC. I like that.
Yeah, it was the walkout song that I always used, and it just always pumped me up.
Nice. All right, worst martial arts related injury?
Man, I have so many. I have so many. So I wrote about this in my book too.
Okay.
I was at a point fighting tournament and I'm moving around with a guy and I'm up. I'm just beating him. And it was like fairly one-sided. And he out of nowhere spins and hits me with an elbow, which was completely illegal in that context.
Mm-hmm.
So he hits me, right? But I didn't know he hit me with his elbow. It was very fast, just pow. And I was like, oh man, he hit me really hard. I was like, all right, well, he got that one. And I remember walking back over to the line. If anybody doesn't know, in point fighting, you have lines, starting lines. Mm-hmm. So I wind up like getting hit. And I remember walking over and my whole face was numb. And I had a little ringing in my ear. And then like I started to get lightheaded. So I like took a knee. And when I took a knee, the room started to slow down. And I looked down at the floor and it was like somebody had poured a bucket of blood out of my face. And it was just pouring and splashing on the floor. I was like, oh man, I'm hurt. And I remember looking up, but I guess I was having like an adrenaline dump or something. And I remember seeing his entire team running towards me, but not looking at me, but they looked mad. And I remember looking back and seeing my entire team looking very mad, running at them. So they start brawling with each other. And I'm like on the floor, like, please stop. Like, I think I need to go to the hospital. So I wind up going to the hospital. It was a Saturday afternoon. And of course it was busy in the ER. So I had this like towel that was on the wound and you could see my cheekbone. I was like completely filleted open. Dang. So I had this towel there to stop the blood, but I was there for like an hour or an hour and a half waiting for a doctor to see me. So the blood had coagulated on the towel. So by the time the nurse came over, they were like, well, let's take a look. And they peeled it and I can hear it like Velcro coming off my face.
Damn.
And so that was probably the worst one that I had over the years.
Wow. Yeah, I would agree. That's not good. All right. Now this one doesn't have to be 4. I've had people give as few as 2 and as many as like 7 or 8, but 3, 4, 5 names you would put on your personal Mount Rushmore of martial arts.
Oh man, that was always tough. Well, I mean, I think that it's very hard to talk about martial arts and pop culture and impact without Bruce Lee.
Right.
I think that it's very similar to that movie Yesterday, if you've ever seen that.
I love that movie. Yeah.
Yeah. Like if the Beatles never existed, how many people would have not even gotten into music?
Yeah.
Because they were so inspiring. So I think even though Bruce Lee himself was not a professional fighter, he was probably one of the most impactful, influential martial artists of our time.
Right.
I think that if you're going to do that, you're going to have to go the founder of judo.
Jigoro Kano. Yep.
Because without him, you don't get jiu-jitsu. Without him, you don't get Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah.
And you don't get judo. So like, he's got to go up there. And the third one for me, I won't do 4, but I think the third one for me might be a little off for some people, but I like Fumio Demura. And the reason I think I pick him is because he like, I know it's a joke, but like he was kind of the king of the demo. You know what I'm saying? Like foot fist way. Like he was the guy that really showed that theatrics can make an impact in the way that people view and want to interact with martial arts.
Yeah.
So like the modern demos that we have today, in my opinion, were based off of his demos. Like these big presentations that would look flashy and be fun, and there's so many people that you can add to that. I mean, if you start talking about like the founder of Kyokushin karate.
Yep.
He made a huge impact in the industry. You start talking about Jun Rhee, like he was able to get Taekwondo, he's given the moniker of founder of Taekwondo in the United States, right? You have all of these amazing martial artists. It's so hard to just pick 3, but it's got to be Bruce Lee. It's got to be the founder of judo. It's got to be Fumio, in my opinion.
Nice. And I actually had the honor of interviewing Fumio before he passed away. He was on my episode number 66, a little over 3 years ago.
That's a big one.
He was fun to talk. And I knew it was going to be a good interview, but I didn't realize how funny he was. He was a hilarious guy. He told some funny stories from the set of The Karate Kid that had me laughing loudly. Yeah, I was glad I got that one to talk to. That was memorable.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm jealous of that one.
Nice. How about a favorite martial arts book other than your own?
Favorite martial arts book? I actually have a stack of them over here.
Nice.
I have my favorite book, but I think my favorite book to dissect, like I still go back and read it over and over and over again and try to figure it out in deeper understanding, is the Book of Five Rings.
Nice.
I think I've read the book maybe over 100 times.
Wow.
And every once in a while, I'll just go back and read it again. And a lot of it's very cryptic. So one of the ones he talks about, like the within the Five Rings, he talks about the Ring of Void. And it's about like that free-flowing, not thinking, existing in the moment type philosophy. And I think that every time I go back and read the book, I discover something new and different because I'm older or my philosophy or ideology has changed. So I view the book and what he's trying to say differently. So I think that's probably one of the best ones for me.
Nice. All right. I'm hoping you have an answer for this one. This one's usually 50-50 with my guests, but favorite martial arts video game? Did you ever get into games?
Absolutely, man. I actually just started a show too. I'm trying to get my first episode out this week of I call it Rob's Bar, because I have like a 15-foot bar right when you walk into my house.
Nice.
And I got lucky. There's an arcade company that gave me a giant arcade. And it has like every game imaginable uploaded onto there. And so I have my guests come over. We chit chat over a drink, whatever drink they prefer. I have it ready for them. And it's very much like Comedians in Cars, but we just talk martial arts and video games.
That's awesome.
Yeah, halfway through their story, we switch over. We play video games while they tell me another story. So over the years, though, man, it's got to be Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat has to be the fighting game that I always really enjoyed. Mortal Kombat 2 specifically was my jam.
Nice. All right, cool. How about a favorite martial arts TV show?
That's a tricky one. I remember watching Martial Law when I was a kid.
Loved it. Yes.
And just falling in love with Kung Fu specifically at that time, because you had like Sammo Hung.
Yep.
And he was such a charismatic guy, but he also like didn't have the standard 1980s action star body. He wasn't like ripped and looked like he did steroids and nothing but lift heavy weights all day. Mm-hmm. He was like some dude. And, Chuck Norris at that time, he had his show.
Yep,
but
Walker. Yep.
Yeah, Walker, Texas Ranger. But he was in good shape. Like he looked like a guy who could do that. And he's Chuck Norris.
Yeah.
But like, I didn't know who Sammo Hung was. And then I got to see that show and I was just blown away by how athletic he was. And I was like, man, this guy is fantastic. And it really made me want to look more into that side of understanding stunt coordination and understanding how to take a fall. And, it really opened my eyes to that side of martial arts.
That's cool.
But yeah. And do you know why people like Sammo?
Why?
Because he's hung.
Nice. He's actually on my dream guest list. I'm trying to get him. He'd be a blast to talk to.
Yeah.
And I love, those shows like that. I've had this conversation that so many of those shows that last only like 1, 2, maybe 3 seasons that were so good and just disappeared. I mean, I mentioned Martial Law a lot. I mentioned Vanishing Sun was a great one. That was 1 season. Street Justice in the early 90s was, I think, 2 seasons. There were so many great shows that featured martial arts that just didn't last. And it was so sad.
Yeah, it is sad. I mean, I think that luckily now with the streaming services and the way that people are really putting together film, like we have the new Karate Kid show is, in my opinion, fantastic.
I love it.
I don't like their fight scenes. I think their fight scenes are bad, but I do like the way that they portray everybody as human.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like this is a good guy, this is a bad guy. It's like, no, we're just people and people are flawed and they're going to make mistakes and that's okay. And I love a good wholesome show.
Yeah.
Like I love a show where it doesn't have all that drama. Like I miss like Family Matters. I miss like shows like Step by Step or like, any of those, like those family sitcom shows, Family Matters.
Yeah. Step by Step. That's another one. Sasha Mitchell. I'm trying to get him on the show too.
Yeah. He's a great martial artist too.
Yeah. He'd be
super talented guy.
And you mentioned Cobra Kai. I've been lucky. I've had 5 or 6 people connected to the Karate Kid universe on my show now.
That's cool too.
Yeah. Still haven't had Johnny's the one I really want to get.
Yeah, of course.
Hoping to get William Zapka.
Yeah, I love seeing him on random stuff that's not Karate Kid related.
Yeah.
Like he was on Hot Tub Time Machine. I was like, oh man.
Yep. And I remember someone just brought up the movie Back to School, and I had forgot he was in that.
Oh yeah,
Rodney Dangerfield and Robert Downey Jr. And yeah.
Oh yeah, what a good one.
Yeah, nice. All right, how about a favorite martial arts movie?
That one's always easy. Barry Gordy's The Last Dragon.
Nice.
Barry Gordy's The Last Dragon is like, first of all, when I first saw it, I was a kid.
Yeah.
I saw that before I ever started training martial arts. I loved the movie before I trained. I loved it even more after I started training. Mm-hmm. It has Ernie Reyes Jr. as like a little kid.
Yep.
You know, like Ty Mach, I think it's like the only movie I've ever seen him do.
Yeah.
You know, and then it was just so corny and cheesy. And that like good, bad movie holds up. Yeah. You know, it's like a bad movie, but it's a fun bad movie.
I love it. Yeah, that's one of the ones like I'm trying to over the years introduce all my kids to all the movies I grew up watching, and that's one I haven't watched with my kids yet. I need to dig that one out and watch it with my daughter. I think because I know I own the DVD, so it'd be fun. All right,
gold.
Final question. This one doesn't have to be a martial arts film. Any movie you've ever seen? Favorite movie fight scene?
Oh man. The Raid.
Nice.
The Raid has such good fight scenes. I won't even just pick one. There's so many good fight scenes in there.
Yeah.
And the way that they shot it, where you'll have like almost no cuts, is so impressive.
Yeah.
Like those guys are so talented. And it showcases like Salat quite a bit, mm-hmm. which 9 times out of 10 doesn't really translate well on film.
Yeah.
Salat doesn't look great. But they were able to make it look just incredible. And the fight scenes were very brutal. You know, like it had a little touch of realism in there. I really, if I had to pick another one, I think John Wick has quite a few just fantastic fight scenes.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of hard to beat when you're seeing things that you might have learned on Tuesday. You know, it's like, oh, I learned that the other day. Like, I know that one. That's a fireman's carry. That's always cool, too.
Nice. Cool. Well, Rob, before I let you go, is there anything that I forgot to ask you about, or you just want to be sure we get out there before we wrap it up?
No, man, I appreciate you having me on. I think we talked about quite a bit, if anybody out there wants to check out my book, you can get it on Amazon. It's called Sensei's Bars and Scars.
Nice.
And then Academy Safe, I think we're launching our website in like 2 months.
Okay.
And then we'll have the documentary. Hopefully we'll get this development agreement with 22 Summers, and then we can be off to the races to finish it.
Awesome. And like I said, I'll put links for everything. I'll put a link to your book. I'll put a link to your website. I'll put a link to Academy Safe, and we'll promote the heck out of it. As of right now, your episode is scheduled to come out October 10th. So I will be promoting the heck out of it. And I think the listeners are going to really enjoy this.
You rock. I appreciate you.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist. We hope you will join us every week for a brand new episode with a different martial artist telling their story. If you enjoy the show, be sure to leave us a review. Also, be sure to check out our website at everydaymartialartist.com. There you can find all of our episodes and contact us to suggest guests and ask questions. Again, thanks for listening to Everyday Martial Artist, and we'll see you next week.